Hi friends, I'm Joe Hopkins, and this is 5 Minutes to Make Sense of the Bible. This week we're focusing on 2 Samuel chapters 21 through the end of that book to 1 Kings chapter 2, plus Psalm 38, which are about the last days of King David's life. This short reflection is especially meant for folks who are reading the books of Samuel and 1 Kings as part of the Life and Times of King David reading program of Streetsville United Church. But even if you're not participating in the program, please listen on. Here's a summary of the end of King David's life. This week we begin with King David having to respond to a 3-year-long famine. And David learns that he needs to work for justice for some folks called the Gibeonites. Apparently many years earlier, King Saul had killed a bunch of these Gibeonite people, and somehow that is connected to a famine decades later. I can't say that I understand the linkage, but King David arranges for 7 men descended from King Saul to be executed by the Gibeonites. Naturally, a mother of these men got pretty upset, and King David gathered the bodies of these men, along with the bones of King Saul and his son Jonathan, and gave them a proper burial. Then the famine ended, and there was much rejoicing. Next, King David has to respond to another war with the Philistines. And David has to come to grips with the fact that he is no longer the young warrior that he once was. So David goes back to his palace, and in his absence, David's mighty warriors kill a bunch of Philistines, including several giants, one of whom is named Goliath. Yes, you heard that right. Goliath. But let's move on. We read a beautiful song of thanksgiving that David declares, which just happens to be virtually the same words as Psalm 18. Sometimes a song is so good that it needs to be repeated. And then we read another psalm-like oracle of David's, which the book of Samuel labels the last words of David. And it sums up God's commitment to bless David's descendants after him. But enough about David. Don't you want to know more about David's mighty warriors? Like the son of Dodo? Or the Great 3? Or the Tremendous 30? Both of which have capital T's if you spell out the words. Suffice to say, they killed a lot of people and had Hebrew names that are hard for an Anglophone like me to pronounce. Oh, but the last name did catch my attention. Do you remember Uriah the Hittite, whose wife was Bathsheba? Awkward. The last story of the books of Samuel is about David's ill-fated census of the people of Israel. God is pretty unhappy with this census. And David knows this and admits that he ordered something that made God unhappy. Nonetheless, God punishes the people of Israel, not David personally, mind you, with a plague that kills 70,000 people over the course of just 3 days. Then David purchases a threshing floor in somebody's barn, builds an altar there, and offers a bunch of sacrifices, which satisfies God, so God stops the plague from doing any more damage. The book of Samuel doesn't share with us what prayers David said at that altar, but maybe it was Psalm 38, because that's another psalm attributed to David, and the author sounds awfully sorry about something. Just saying. The last days of King David are recorded in the first 2 chapters of the first book of Kings, and the first chapter recalls yet another power struggle between David's sons. This time the conflict is between Adonijah and Solomon. Yes, I'm talking about that Solomon, so you know who won out in this conflict. But it seems kind of interesting that it took the combined efforts of Bathsheba, yes, that Bathsheba, and the prophet Nathan to convince King David to name Solomon as official heir to the throne. And then just before he dies, David instructs Solomon in ways very similar to Moses passing the torch to Joshua many generations before. Stuff like, be strong and courageous and obedient to God, and, oh, Here's a list of people to deal with as a new king. And when I say deal with, I'm thinking Godfather style. And with that, David's life comes to an end. Now for some reflection questions. Justice comes in a lot of different forms for different people. How do you feel about David handing over the men for execution to satisfy the Gibeonites' desire for justice? What do you believe about the death penalty in contemporary criminal justice systems? Like King David, public leaders often succeed because of the success of their followers. Who are some unsung or less sung heroes who deserve credit for successful leaders today? And after hearing so much about the life and times of King David, how do you feel about him? What about David inspires you? What don't you like about him? How do you think that we should talk about David in church and elsewhere? So there, 5 minutes to make sense of the Bible. We've now finished our Life and Times of King David Bible reading program, so we'll take a bit of a break. But I've heard from folks that they've enjoyed this video series, so I will continue it in the future based on the readings from the Bible that I'll preach about at our Sunday morning worship services. As always, I hope that you will continue to read the Bible on your own and that you will notice some details that pique your curiosity. God often tries to catch our attention by piquing our curiosity. And as good as reading the Bible alone is, please remember that we make the most sense of the Bible when we read the Bible together. Peace, friends.